Hello, my name is Sophia Sen. I'm on Team 2, and I am the summarizer. Today, this PowerPoint is going to be about the defense of looting. So, to start this off, let's start with the definitions. The definition of looting is the mass exploration of property, mass shoplifting during a moment of upheaval or riot. Looting is highly racialized from its exception in the English language and is taken from the Hindus as the origin of loot, meaning goods or spoiled. Around the time of September 2020, there was a lot of looting going around associating with the death of George Floyd and the demonstration going on of the Black Lives Matter. And in that time, there was a lot of looting going on in New York, and the mayor, the government were all just saying how damaged the community was due to this act and the businesses being destroyed, of how the police officers, government officials, and pundits have demanded an end to the riots. Um, and then go on and so forth about the damages. Now let's continue. So rioting versus looting. So to riot, it refers to any moment of mass unrest or upheaval, a space in which a mass of people have produced a situation in which the general laws that govern society no longer function. And then looting is more common among movements that are coming from below, and it tends to be an attack on businesses, commercial space, and government buildings. As we saw, it's been targeted more into smaller businesses in the moment of the Black Lives Matter. But they all go into a broader category and more into the tactics as well. Let's move on. So the tactics of rioting. It just straightforward, it gets people what it needs. Easy as that. It maintains lives and reproduce without having to rely on a job. It's a huge, powerful mode of action. This also just summarizes the people not having to work. And it gets people what they need free right off the bat. They're very capable of living and reproducing their lives without having to rely on jobs or a wage, especially during COVID times, which was just unreliable, especially in these kind of communities. It's not often available for a job and it's a huge risk. So looting always came in as the best tactical power and rioting as well. It's kind of the same thing. And this also attacks in a way which food and other items are distributed, attacks the idea of property, and attacks the idea in which for someone to have a roof over their head or a meal ticket, they have to work for a boss, and in order to buy things that people just like them or else in the world to do in the same condition. You can do this for free, or you can just work hours and just have a boss. So you get to the heart of the property relation and demonstrate that without police and without state oppressions, we can have things for free. It just points to the way in which that's unjust and the people that and just the people that have not much to start with and have to go under certain conditions, and especially for the profit of the people who own the stores and the factories. Moving on to common myths and tropes about looting. So we have the outside agitator myth, which is one of the most powerful ones, used by Donald Trump and the Democrats. It's people doing the riots, mainly coming from the outside. It's a classic. This one really goes back to slavery when plantation owners would claim that it was freedmen and Yankees coming south and giving the enslaved these crazy ideas, that they were real human beings and that's why everything is revolted. Next is looters and rioters are not part of the protest or the movement. This was protesters trying to appear respectful and not make it look frightening. It's very common that looters and rioters are not part of the protests, and it's not part of the movement. And that goes on with the history that we have talked about and the history of protesters trying to look better, respectful, and politically legible for the movement, and not wanting to come off as the stereotype that have been seen of them being so terrifying and threatening. But the other one is just the looters acting as if they were consumers. Like, oh, why are they taking this expensive, like, kitchenware, makeup, flat screen TVs instead of something useful, such as food, rice, beans, pasta, bread, all this stuff? Like, are they not taking something that they deserve the most? And that's the biggest question. Like, as they, if they were just surviving, I mean, it would just be one thing, but they're taking all these kind of stuff. And all these tropes come down to claiming that the rioters and the looters just don't know what they're doing. They're acting, in a disorganized way, and just make it seem like these people were animals in a way. But the history of the movement for liberation in America is full of looters and rioters, and it's always been part of our movements. And it goes so much forth than just looking like animals, taking these things as TVs and unnecessary to these people instead of just taking the things to survive on, which is just, there's so much more to that. So, the criticism, talking about radical, progressive, criticize looting. These people just go on and on. So, starting with the civil rights movement, it involved in the 50s and 60s, talking about nonviolence during the movement to appeal to the Northern liberals and how they could flatter themselves that racism was a Southern condition. Its popular understanding was how successful it was nonviolent and less successful when it was focused on Black power, which says a lot, don't you think? It's a myth that we get taught over and over again from the first movement we learn about the civil rights movement, that it was nonviolent and easygoing, that's what it matters. But that's not true because you're bringing Black power into it and it's less focused and less successful. Come on now. So the nonviolence emerged in the 50s and 60s, like we discussed, and it did work with the lunch counters, sit-ins, and the liberals would flatter themselves that racism was a Southern condition and also a context with the Cold War and a mass anti-colonial revolt going around in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And the US had to compete with the Soviet Union for influence over them, so it was really in the US interest to not be in the country of Jim Crow, segregation, and fascism, because they had to appeal to all these new Black and brown nations all over the world. With these two things combined with the nonviolence, it turned out to be a relatively effective tactic in some ways. Even under these conditions, the freedom riders and the protesters were all protected by the armed guards. We remembered of the struggle of 63 in the Birmingham. You see all these famous photos of Bull Connor releasing the pictures of police dogs and fire hose on these teenagers, these students, as nonviolent. But it actually turned out to be the first urban riot in the movement. This resulted in the kids getting up, throwing rocks, and smashing police cars, storefront windows, and all that stuff, which was the biggest fear we had. This then led to Robert F. Kennedy to write a civil rights bill and forcing John F. Kennedy to sign it. With all this stuff going on, it was just bad. But the biggest factor was the anti-Blackness and contempt for poor people who want to live a better life, which looting immediately provides. And one thing about looting is that it's just going to freak everybody out. But in terms of potential crimes that people can commit against the state, this is nonviolent. You're mass shoplifting. Most stores are insurance, and it's just hurting insurance companies on some level, but this is just money. And also just property compared to other crimes going on in the state of shooting, killing, and all that. So moving on is the riot controversies. Headlines were spread that people were looting on their small businesses in their own neighborhood, which in the first point of view, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is just terrible. Like these were small family. Like why are they having to deal with this? Um, a specific example I'm gonna go into is the owner of this small business, and he was Korean. He also was a killer. He killed a 15-year-old who came in to buy orange juice. Crazy. And that was a family-owned business, immigrant-owned business, where anti-blackness and white supremacist violence was being perpetrated. You can't really just say you're attacking your own community is to say to rioters you don't know what you're doing. But there's a lot to disagree on that, and I know people know that too. In moments like this, is there is small business, small communities that we want to look out for, but then they're doing things like this where they're attacking other people and killing, but they have the wrong intentions. The looters and rioters don't attack private homes. They don't attack community centers. And for example, in Minneapolis, there was a small independent bookstore that was untouched, but all the blocks around it were basically looted or even leveled, burned down, and that store just remained untouched through the whole weeks and month of rioting. And it attacked places like Tesla and Gucci, but there's not much to be really sympathetic when it comes to high and foreign brand. It's a convenient way of positioning yourself. So, grocery stores and pharmacies. The small business, family, or locally owned can't provide the best workers' protection. I think we know that. There also goes into the right wing myth, and then a business being attacked in the community is ultimately about attacking like modes of oppression that exists in the community already. Then the tendency to try and blame people for fighting back, revealing the inequity of the injustice that's already been formed by the time that they're fighting. It's unsafe and it's hard to give workers protections in communities like this. They are no more likely to have provide good stuff for the community than a big business would. There is a Republican myth that's lasted over 20 years of crawling into a leftist discourse that the small business owners must be respected, that the small business owner create jobs and is part of the community, but that's what we call into the right wing myth. And it is sad, it really is, but it just assumes, well, what if you're in a food desert? But in the food desert, it's already an unjust situation. There's this real tendency to try and blame people for fighting back, but for really revealing the inequity of the injustice. All right, moving on is the violence. Although there is breaking windows, lighting a dumpster on fire, and other events, there's nothing compared to the police's murder of Tamir Rice. If I am saying that right, sorry. Police wanted a controlled, peaceful protest, like they always present themselves, but they will stand there with dozens of not soldiers, officers who are heavily armed on standby, waiting for one wrong move to shoot. The activists were majorly nonviolent, but police always took it up a notch and, led to a death. it just never made anyone feel safe. If you're protesting about a topic you're so, passionate about, and you have all these officers ready to shoot at any time, it makes you scared. You don't even want to be there anymore. And in order for people to feel free, they have to do events in a non-peaceful way, doing things that scare us and others. Sorry, that was a typo right there. When peaceful protest happens, no change is happening. So, it's a big police tactic for this, which is also called control management. And I don't understand how you're gonna manage this by one wrong move and you're gonna shoot an innocent person. Next is the audience question. Now we're gonna talk about what are the root causes of looting in society. It's a really good time to think deep about this. The roots are poverty, system injustice, social displacement, and breakdown of social order, as we can see. It can be seen that if you're higher up in the class, in the hierarchy, you're not gonna want to be looting. And it's hard for jobs that are surrounded in the poverty areas to have enough money to feed, to provide, and looting is just one of the simple ways. The second audience question is, how does historical context shape perceptions of looting? So, from my point of view, the question it goes deeper, and my answer is the historical context of the civil rights movement is shaped by the perception, by challenging systemic oppression and inequality. Let me know what y'all think. These are the two questions that I feel like it's not too deep, but it opens up your mind a little bit. Thank you.